I get asked this all the time, but all I'm trying to do is to make sense of the world. And to make sense of the world and to categorize knowledge into a understandable set of digestible pieces. This is all I'm trying to do in my day-to-day activities as a scholar, as a mathematician, is to simply describe what I'm seeing, to describe the natural environment around me in terms of the mathematical language. And I have noticed that it irritates some of my peers in the workplace because I'm attempting to describe things in a bit of an overtly a linguistic manner. And I know that this is irritating to them because despite the fact that we mathematicians think of the world as being describable by mathematics and that the mathematics is a human created language, even though we agree on this in theory, not many people would like to use mathematics in a literary manner. And this is what I started doing in my office. I would look out of my window and look at the scene outside because I was always interested in people. And this might be attributed to the stereotype of being a woman, that despite being a mathematician, I am still interested in people and looking at people's faces and relationships. So I'm looking out of the window of my office, and I think, perhaps because I have always enjoyed literature, I have always enjoyed reading books, and I thought, well, my language of preference is not my mother tongue, it's not English, with which I usually write my academic papers. My language of preference is mathematics, and so I embarked on writing a description of the scene outside my window in a mathematical language. And what I discovered to my delight is that with sufficient information, with sufficient knowledge about this mathematical language, then I could depict quite vividly the scene outside my window, and not only represent it in the mathematics, but to embellish it with my ideas, embellish it with my interpretation using this language. So I was very creatively, very subjectively, very artistically interpreting the outside scenery and the people walking along the pavement and the trees rustling in the wind and so on, interpreting it in the language of mathematics. So my peers down the corridor of my office in the university got quite annoyed, and the funding board of the university got quite annoyed that I was wasting precious time, and time is money, on creating mathematical poetry essentially, and prose about the scene around me. But then, of course, I did not let that slow me down, and instead I took to getting more ambitious. So I wrote a novel in mathematics, which describes various things around. It describes human relationships, it describes the fractal nature of the trees around in the parks outside, and it delineated the networks which exist around us, but in a way which is selective, and being selective is to be creative. and thus by selecting my narrative, it didn't matter essentially that I had used a mathematical language. It did not matter at all because it was still a creative act. So I set about publishing this novel, and you'd be surprised that my novel idea about human relationships written in a mathematical language was quite popular, was quite intriguing to the publishers, to various agents. It seemed to be surprisingly quite appealing, despite not gaining traction with my mathematician colleagues at the university. However, we stumbled upon possibly a quite a predictable problem, which was that the readership would not possess the required knowledge, the required literacy in the mathematical language to be able to read my novel. And this is certainly a problem. If you cannot read with a certain amount of accuracy and understanding and literacy, then how can you interpret? How can you appreciate the artistic the meanderings and the thoughtfulness and the subversion of the mathematical language, which I was playing at in the mathematical novel? So essentially, because there was enough conceptual interest on the side of the publishers, we had to open schools. We had to open schools with classes in reading mathematical literature. So today I find myself to be the chair of that school. And so whoever enrolls in this class can then graduate with the ability to read my novel. And hopefully they are not just sitting through the class to be able to read my novel, but the many potential mathematical novels that may stem from this and emerge in the future is the thought behind this. And so I am very excited to see the progress in this domain.